David always knew he was different from other boys his age. While his classmates spent their time playing rough sports and acting tough, David was the kid who would stop to help a lost puppy find its way home. At 19, he had a heart bigger than most people twice his age. But that same heart made him a target for jokes and teasing every morning. David would walk into Lincoln Community College with his head held high. Even though he knew what was coming, his classmates had given him nicknames that weren't exactly kind. They called him Sensitive Steve and the Crying Guy because he couldn't hide his emotions the way other boys seemed to do so easily. The worst part wasn't even the name calling. It was the way people looked at him when he showed any real feeling. Last month, during a presentation about homeless veterans, David's voice had cracked when he talked about an old man he met at the shelter where he volunteered. The whole class had gone quiet, and then someone in the back row had started snickering. Soon, half the room was trying not to laugh. David's face had turned red that day, but he finished his presentation anyway. He talked about how the old veteran had served his country for 20 years, only to end up sleeping on the streets because he couldn't afford his medication. David's eyes had filled with tears as he spoke, and he didn't try to hide them. That's just who he was. After class, David had overheard two of his classmates talking in the hallway. "Can you believe that guy?" one of them said. "He cries more than my little sister." They both laughed, not caring that David was right there behind them. This kind of thing happened all the time when David worked his part-time job at the local grocery store. His coworkers would roll their eyes whenever he took extra time to help elderly customers carry their bags to their cars. They'd make jokes about how David was too nice for his own good and how he needed to toughen up. But David couldn't understand why being kind was seen as a weakness when Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived alone and shopped at the store every Tuesday, told him about her late husband. David listened, really listened. He remembered details about her stories and always asked how she was doing. When she came in with red eyes one day because her cat had passed away, David had given her a hug right there in aisle 3. His manager had pulled him aside later that day. "Look, David," he'd said, "I appreciate that you care about the customers, but you're not a therapist. Just ring up their groceries and move on." David had nodded and said he understood, but inside, he felt confused. Why was caring about people such a bad thing? Why did everyone act like showing emotion was something to be ashamed of? The loneliness was the hardest part. David watched his classmates easily make friends and find girlfriends, while he spent most of his time alone. The few times he tried to ask someone out, they looked at him like he was from another planet. One girl had actually laughed and said, "You're too intense for me." Another had told her friends that David was too emotional to date. At home, things weren't much better. David's own family didn't quite know what to make of him. His father would shake his head whenever David got emotional watching a movie or talking about something he cared about. "Boys don't cry," his father would say, even though David was 19 years old. His mother was more understanding, but even she sometimes seemed embarrassed by David's sensitivity. David's younger brother Jake was everything David wasn't. Jake played football, had a girlfriend, and never seemed to worry about other people's feelings. Their parents were always praising Jake for being strong and tough, while David felt like he was constantly disappointing them just by being himself. One evening, David was walking home from work when he saw a group of his classmates hanging out at the local pizza place. They were laughing and having a good time, and for a moment, David thought about going over to say hello. Maybe they'd invite him to join them. Maybe things could be different. But then he heard one of them mention his name. "Did you see David in English class today?" the guy was saying. He actually teared up during that poem about friendship. Like, seriously, who does that? The whole group had burst into laughter, and David felt his heart sink. He'd stood there on the sidewalk, watching through the window as they continued to make fun of him. That's when he realized that no matter how hard he tried to fit in, he would always be the outsider, the boy who felt too much in a world that didn't want him to feel anything at all. David had walked home that night feeling more alone than ever, but he also made a decision. He wasn't going to change who he was just to make other people comfortable. If caring about others made him weak in their eyes, then so be it. He'd rather be weak and genuine than strong and fake. Little did David know that his biggest challenge and his greatest opportunity were just around the corner. Sometimes the very things that make us different are the things that make us special. And sometimes the person who will love us most is the one who sees our supposed weaknesses as our greatest strengths. David's story was just beginning, and the best parts were yet to come. Everything changed for David on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. He was sitting in his usual spot in the back corner of the sociology classroom, trying to stay invisible as always, when Professor Martinez announced they'd be working on group projects for the next 3 weeks. David's heart sank. Group projects meant being stuck with classmates who barely tolerated him, or worse, having to work alone while everyone else formed their teams. He was already mentally preparing himself for another awkward experience when he heard a voice beside him. "Mind if I sit here?" David looked up to see a girl with kind eyes and a warm smile. He recognized her as the new transfer student who'd started classes just 2 weeks ago. Everyone called her Amy, and she seemed different from the other students. She actually paid attention in class and asked thoughtful questions that made Professor Martinez's face light up. Sure," David said, moving his backpack to make room for her. Amy had transferred from a bigger university across the state. She was studying to become a nurse. And from what David had observed, she was serious about her education. She always sat in the front row, took detailed notes, and never seemed to join in when other students were gossiping or complaining about assignments. "I've been watching you in class," Amy said quietly as Professor Martinez explained the project requirements. "You always have interesting things to say during discussions. Would you want to be my partner for this project?" David's mouth fell open. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The smartest, most focused student in the class was asking him to be her partner. Him? The guy everyone called too emotional and weird. "Are you sure?" David asked, certain he'd misunderstood something. "Absolutely," Amy replied with a smile. "I think we'd work well together." The project was about emotional intelligence and leadership, and Professor Martinez had assigned it because he wanted students to explore how feelings and emotions played a role in making good decisions. Most of the class groaned when they heard the topic, but David felt a spark of excitement. This was something he actually understood. Over the next few days, David and Amy met at the campus library to work on their research. David was nervous at first, worried that Amy would realize she'd made a mistake in choosing him as a partner. But as they talked about the project, he began to relax. Amy was nothing like the other students. She didn't roll her eyes when David got excited about their research. She didn't make jokes when he shared personal stories that related to their topic. Instead, she listened carefully and asked thoughtful questions. That showed she was genuinely interested in what he had to say. "You know," Amy said one afternoon as they were working in the library, "I've noticed that you really pay attention to how people feel. Like yesterday, when that guy Jake was being rude to the librarian. You were the only one who looked uncomfortable about it." David felt his cheeks turn red. "I just think people should be nicer to each other," he said quietly. "That's exactly what I mean," Amy continued. "Most people our age don't even notice when someone's being hurt or ignored. But you do. That's actually really rare." David had never thought about his sensitivity as something rare or valuable. He'd always seen it as the thing that made him different and alone. But the way Amy talked about it made it sound like it might actually be a good thing. As they worked together, David learned more about Amy too. She came from a family that expected her to be perfect all the time. Her parents were both doctors, and they planned out her entire life before she was even born. She was supposed to get perfect grades, marry someone from a good family, and follow in their footsteps. "Sometimes I feel like I'm suffocating," Amy admitted one evening as they sat in the campus coffee shop. "Everyone expects me to be this perfect person who never makes mistakes or has doubts. But I'm not perfect. I have feelings and worries just like everyone else." David understood exactly what she meant. "People always tell me I feel too much, he said. But I'd rather feel too much than not feel anything at all, Amy nodded. That's exactly how I feel. When I watch you in class, I see someone who's honest about who he is. You don't pretend to be someone you're not just to fit in. Their conversations continued long after they'd finished their research. They talked about their dreams, their fears, and their frustrations with the world around them. David found himself opening up in ways he never had before, and Amy seemed to genuinely care about everything he shared. The other students started to notice their friendship. David would catch classmates staring at them in the hallway, whispering. Among themselves, he overheard Jake telling his friends, "I don't know what she sees in that crybaby. She could hang out with anyone." But Amy didn't seem to care what other people thought. She continued to seek out David's company, and their study sessions gradually turned into something that felt more like friendship. Then schoolwork, one evening. As they were walking across campus after spending hours in the library, Amy stopped suddenly and turned to face David. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. David nodded, feeling nervous about what she might say. "I've been watching how you treat people," Amy said. "Like today, when you helped that student who dropped all his books, or last week, when you gave your umbrella to that girl who was getting soaked in the rain. You do these things without even thinking about it, and you never expect anything in return." David felt embarrassed. "It's not a big deal," he said. "But it is a big deal," Amy insisted. "Do you know how rare it is to find someone who genuinely cares about other people? Most guys our age are so focused on trying to look cool or tough that they forget to be kind." As they reached the parking lot where Amy's car was parked, she turned to face him again. "I know this might sound weird, but I feel like I can be myself when I'm with you. I don't have to pretend to be perfect or worry about saying the wrong thing." David felt his heart racing. He'd never had anyone talk to him like this before. For the first time in his life, someone saw his sensitivity not as a weakness, but as something valuable. "I feel the same way," he said quietly. Amy smiled, and David felt like maybe, just maybe, things were about to change for the better. Winter came early that year, and with it came a change in David and Amy's friendship that neither of them had expected. What had started as study sessions and casual conversations had slowly grown into something deeper. They found themselves texting late into the night, sharing thoughts and feelings they'd never told anyone else. David had never experienced anything like this before. For the first time in his life, someone actually wanted to spend time with him. Amy would seek him out between classes, save him a seat in the cafeteria, and include him in conversations with other students. She never acted embarrassed to be seen with him, even when other people gave them strange looks. Their first real date happened almost by accident. They'd been studying at the library when Amy mentioned she was hungry but didn't want to eat alone. At the cafeteria, David had suggested they go to the small diner down the street, and before he knew it, they were sharing a plate of fries and talking about everything except schoolwork. "My parents wouldn't approve of this," Amy said quietly, stirring her coffee. With a distant look in her eyes. "Of what?" David asked, though he had a feeling he knew what she meant. "Of us. Of me spending so much time with someone they'd consider beneath my social level." Amy's voice was sad but honest. "They have very specific ideas about who I should date and what my life should look like." David felt his heart sink. He'd been so happy these past few weeks that he'd almost forgotten about the reality of their different backgrounds. Amy came from a wealthy family who expected her to marry someone with money and status. David worked at a grocery store and lived in a small apartment with his family. "I understand if you don't want to be seen with me," David said, trying to keep his voice steady. Amy reached across the table and took his hand. "That's not what I meant at all. I don't care what my parents think. I care about you, David. I care about how you make me feel when we're together." Those words changed everything for David. Someone cared about him. Someone actually chose to be with him, despite what others might think. It felt like a miracle. Their relationship grew stronger through the cold winter months. They meet at quiet places where Amy's family friends wouldn't see them. David would pick her up after her evening classes, and they'd drive to the park. On the edge of town, talking in his old car with the heater running. David worked extra shifts at the grocery store to save money for small gifts and modest dates. He couldn't afford expensive restaurants or fancy presents, but he found ways to show Amy how much she meant to him. He'd bring her favorite coffee to class, remember important dates like when she had big exams, and listen patiently when she talked about the pressure she felt from her family. Amy had never experienced this kind of attention before. The boys from her social circle tried to impress her with expensive gifts and bragging about their achievements. But David impressed her by remembering that she was worried about her grandmother's health, by asking about her dreams of becoming a nurse, and by supporting her when she doubted herself. "You're different from anyone I've ever known," Amy told him one evening as they sat in his car, watching the sunset over the empty parking lot. "Other guys try so hard to seem tough and in control. But you're not afraid to be real with me." David felt like he was living in a dream. After years of being alone and misunderstood, he found someone who not only accepted him, but actually loved him for who he was. Amy saw his sensitivity as a strength, not a weakness. She valued his emotional intelligence and his ability to truly listen to her. By spring, their relationship had become serious. They moved beyond casual dating to talking about their future. Together, David had started imagining a life with Amy, even though he knew the challenges they'd face. Her family expected her to transfer to a 4-year university and focus on her career. They had no idea she was falling in love with the boy they considered completely unsuitable for their daughter. The secret nature of their relationship was both exciting and painful. David loved having Amy all to himself, but he hated that she felt like she had to hide their connection from the people who mattered to her. He worried that eventually she'd have to choose between him and her family's expectations. But for now, they were happy. They'd found something real and genuine in a world that often seemed fake and superficial. David's heart was full in a way it had never been before, and Amy felt like she could finally breathe freely when she was with him. Neither of them knew that their biggest test was coming sooner than they thought. Sometimes love is enough to overcome any obstacle, and sometimes it takes a life-changing event to prove just how strong that love really is. The morning Amy discovered she was pregnant, the world seemed to stop spinning. She sat in her small apartment bathroom, staring at the test in her trembling hands, watching as the pink lines appeared and changed everything she thought she knew about her future. At 20 years old, Amy had her entire life planned out. She was supposed to transfer to the state university in the fall, complete her nursing program, and build a successful career before even thinking about marriage or children. A baby wasn't part of the plan. Not now. Not like this. For an hour, Amy sat on her bathroom floor, crying and trying to process what this meant. Her parents would be devastated. They'd worked so hard to give her opportunities they'd never had, and now she was about to throw it all away. At least, that's how they'd see it. When she finally called David, her voice was shaking so badly he could barely understand her. "Can you come over?" she whispered into the phone. "I need to talk to you about something important." David could hear the tears in her voice, and he dropped everything to rush to her apartment. When Amy opened the door, her face was red and puffy from crying. She led him to the couch and sat down, unable to look him in the eye. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly, the words hanging in the air between them like a bomb waiting to explode. David felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. For a moment, he couldn't speak, couldn't think, couldn't process what she'd just told him. Then, slowly, he reached over and took her hand. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. Amy nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I took 3 tests. They're all positive." David's mind was racing. He thought about his part-time job at the grocery store, his family's small apartment, his uncertain future. He thought about Amy's dreams of becoming a nurse, her family's expectations, and the life she'd be giving up. But mostly, he thought about Amy, the girl who'd seen something good in him when no one else would, the girl who'd chosen him despite what everyone else thought, the girl who was now carrying his child and looking at him with fear and uncertainty in her eyes. "We'll figure this out," David said, pulling her into his arms. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Amy broke down completely then, sobbing into his chest as months of pressure and stress finally overwhelmed her. David held her tightly, stroking her hair and whispering reassurances even though he had no idea how they were going to manage this. The news spread quickly through their small social circle. Amy's best friend was the first to know, and despite promises to keep it secret, word got out. Soon, everyone at school was talking about the smart, wealthy transfer student who'd gotten pregnant by the emotional guy from the wrong side of town. The reactions were exactly what they'd expected. Some people were sympathetic, but many others were judgmental and cruel. David overheard conversations in the hallway about how Amy had ruined her life and how David had trapped her with a pregnancy. Amy's parents found out when her mother called to discuss summer plans, and Amy couldn't hide her morning sickness any longer. The phone call was brutal. Her father screamed about disappointment and wasted opportunities. Her mother cried and begged Amy to fix this mistake before it was too late. "You have options." Her mother said during a tense family meeting the following weekend, "You're still young. You can take care of this situation and get your life back on track. No one ever has to know." Amy's father was more direct. "That boy has no future, no prospects, no way to support you and a child. Are you really going to throw away everything we've worked for because of one mistake?" The pressure was intense. Amy's parents offered to pay for everything to help her handle the situation quietly and to pretend none of this had ever happened. They could transfer her to a school in another state, and she could start over with a clean slate. But every time Amy looked at David, she saw something her parents couldn't see. She saw a man who'd stood by her side from the moment she'd told him the news. She saw someone who'd already started working extra shifts to save money for the baby, even though she hadn't asked him to. She saw a person who was scared but willing to face that fear for her and their child. The decision wasn't easy. Amy spent sleepless nights weighing her options, considering what this choice would mean for her future, her relationship with her parents, and her dreams of becoming a nurse. She thought about the practical challenges they'd face as young parents, without much money or support, but she also thought about the kind of man David was. She'd watched him comfort crying customers at the grocery store, help elderly people with their groceries, and show kindness to everyone he met. She'd seen his patience, his compassion, and his ability to love without conditions. "I want to keep the baby," Amy finally told David one evening as they sat in his car, watching the stars through the windshield. "I want to build a life with you, even if it's not the life I originally planned." David felt tears in his eyes as he turned to face her. "Are you sure? I know this isn't what you wanted. I know I can't give you the life your parents think you deserve." Amy took his face in her hands and looked directly into his eyes. "You're wrong," she said firmly. "You can give me something much more valuable than money or status. You can give me a real partnership built on love and respect. You can give me a family where feelings matter and kindness is valued." That night, they made their decision together. They would keep the baby, face whatever challenges came their way, and build a life based on the love they'd found in each other. It wouldn't be easy, but they were ready to try. The people who laughed at David for being too emotional were about to see just how strong emotions could make a person when they were fighting for the people they loved most. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it was impossible to ignore. The same people who'd mocked David for being too sensitive and too emotional now watched in amazement as he stepped up to handle the biggest challenge of his life. Within a week of Amy's decision to keep the baby, David had already started making changes. He dropped his evening classes and picked up additional shifts at the grocery store. He spent his lunch breaks researching everything he could about pregnancy, childbirth, and newborn care. The boy who'd once been embarrassed about crying during movies was now unashamed about reading parenting books in public. Amy's parents initially refused to support their decision, but David's response surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of getting angry or defensive, he simply showed up. He attended every doctor's appointment with Amy, taking notes and asking questions. He researched healthy foods for pregnant women and started cooking nutritious meals for Amy when she was too tired to take care of herself. When Amy experienced morning sickness so severe she could barely get out of bed, David was there with ginger tea and crackers. When she cried about how her body was changing, he reassured her that she was beautiful and that he loved her more each day. When she worried about money, he showed her the budget he created and the savings account he'd opened for their growing family. The grocery store manager, who'd once criticized David for being too emotional with customers, began to see David's sensitivity in a new light. David's ability to read people and respond to their needs made him an excellent employee. He was promoted to assistant manager within 3 months, and his salary increase helped ease some of the financial pressure. Amy's parents slowly began to change their opinion as well. They had expected David to panic and run when faced with real responsibility. Instead, they watched him embrace fatherhood with the same emotional intelligence that had once made him a target for ridicule. When Amy's father met David for the first time, he prepared for the worst. He'd expected to find an immature boy who'd gotten his daughter into trouble and couldn't handle the consequences. Instead, he found a young man who spoke knowledgeably about prenatal care, who had concrete plans for supporting his family, and who clearly adored Amy. "I was wrong about you," Amy's father admitted during a tense but honest conversation. "I thought you were just some emotional kid who didn't have his life together. But watching how you've stepped up for Amy and the baby, I can see that your sensitivity is actually a strength." The baby was born on a warm spring morning, and David was there for every moment. He held Amy's hand during labor, encouraging her when she felt like giving up. He was the first to hold their daughter, and when the nurse placed the tiny baby in his arms, tears streamed down his face without shame. "She's perfect," he whispered, and Amy felt her heart overflow with love for both her daughter and the man who'd helped bring her into the world. David's approach to fatherhood was unlike anything Amy had ever seen. He wasn't afraid to change diapers, give baths, or comfort the baby when she cried. He sang lullabies, read stories, and talked to their daughter like she could understand every word. His emotional availability made him a natural father, and Amy often found herself watching him with amazement. The same qualities that had made David an outsider in college made him an incredible parent. He was patient when the baby was fussy, intuitive about what she needed, and completely devoted to her well-being. He could calm her when no one else could, and he never complained about sleepless nights or the exhaustion that came with caring. For a newborn, Amy's parents became regular visitors, and they couldn't help but notice how David had created a warm, loving home despite their limited budget. He painted the nursery himself, built furniture from second-hand materials, and filled their small apartment with photos and memories of their growing family. "I've never seen Amy so happy," her mother admitted to David one afternoon as they watched Amy play with the baby. "I was worried that having a child so young would ruin her life. But I can see now that this is exactly the life she was meant to have." David had found stable work in social services, drawn to helping others because of his natural empathy. His supervisor often commented on David's ability to connect with clients and understand their needs. The emotional intelligence that had once made him a target for jokes now made him valuable in his career. Amy returned to school part-time, determined to finish her nursing degree. David supported her completely, taking care of the baby while she studied and encouraging her when she felt overwhelmed. Their partnership was built on mutual respect and shared responsibilities, and they made every decision together. The people who once mocked David now looked at his life with respect and, in some cases, envy. He had something many of them lacked: a loving family, a partner who truly appreciated him, and the confidence that came from being valued for exactly who he was. Jake, his former classmate who led many of the jokes about David being too emotional, ran into him at the grocery store one day. Jake was still single, still trying to impress people with his tough guy act, and still alone most nights. "Man, you really have it all figured out," Jake said, looking at David holding his happy, healthy baby. "I always thought you were too soft, but look at you now. You've got a beautiful family and you seem really happy. David smiled, shifting his daughter to his other arm. I'm the same person I always was, he said. I just found someone who loves me for who I am, not who I was pretending to be. As David walked home that evening, carrying his daughter and thinking about the dinner Amy was preparing for them, he realized that the journey from being mocked to being respected hadn't required him to change who he was. It had simply required him to find people who valued authenticity over appearances, kindness over toughness, and love over status. The boy who cried at movies had become a man who wasn't afraid to show emotion, and that courage had given him everything he'd ever wanted. Sometimes being different isn't a weakness. Sometimes it's exactly what makes you strong.